Hi there, this is Saujanya Shetty from the Attitude Makeover show. Welcome back. In this episode, I'm joined by chef and series restaurateur Gautam Krishnankutty, a chef by choice and a businessman by chance. Gautam delves into how he dabbles both the hats, his discovery of the culinary world during his time in the US, and also his innate sense of what makes food work. People's relationship with food is unique. So is the knack of figuring out how to balance catering to their taste with navigating one's own personal talent and curiosity. Having identified his niche, Gautam goes on to talk about his experiments and creative process in what he calls his food lab, touching upon the crucial topics of dignity of labor, funding, and putting failures into perspective. He shares some advice for all the aspiring chefs, business owners, and food creators out there. Here's my conversation with Gautam, where we talk about food, passion, and more. I hope you like it. All right. Hey, thank you so much, Gautam. Lovely meeting the Lord. I've been following your food for 20, 22 years now. I don't think you know that you've been feeding me. So I'll start with this meme I saw earlier.
Okay.
Hey, I'm a chef. I'm here to feed your ass, not to kiss it. And I think you sort of, for me, you personify that meme in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, sure.
Because...
that I am that now, but there was a time I used to kiss some ass.
Oh, you were, no?
Well, when you first start off, you have to do all that.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to start with first, who is Gautam?
Jesus, that's a really tough question. That's a tough question for any human being. But I suppose what I am is a born and bred Bangalore boy.
Yeah.
That grew up here. Always had some kind of interest in food, but really, you grew up in India, and if you tell your folks that you want to be a chef or anything like that, it never even occurred to me that I wanted to be a chef. So I was always in that world of being either software engineer or medical doctor, or the usual stuff. So I grew up in that world of small town Bangalore. Bangalore Club was my world, pretty much. And that's it. And then I went to the US and, of course, spread my wings a little bit over there. And that's where all the food and that whole world started coming closer to me. Wasn't really something that I thought of.
So were you doing gigs over there as well, or
not at all? I mean, my only connection to food there was working in restaurants to pay for my beers and my rent and whatever. I mean, my cigarettes and stuff like that. So, and when I mean working in restaurants, I mean not as a chef. Throughout, all the way from college, in the college cafeteria, washing dishes, sweeping the floors, what have you. I mean, everything
minimum
but
wages. Huh?
Yeah, for completely minimum. And those days, minimum wage was $3.50.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So that's what.
So I worked at $12, right?
Yeah. When I left, it was about $7. So that's kind of money I was getting, but that was enough because I was scholarships and I took care of everything else. So always in that world, one kind of tiny toe in that world, but never really actually cooked until maybe the last 4 or 5 years I was there. Then I, in the college cafeteria flipping burgers. I mean, that wasn't really cooking, but even there I had friends that would come in when I was cooking because I'd put chili powder on the burger and garlic powder and make it a little more exciting than the usual stuff. So not really. I mean, throughout my time there, I was studying politics and history, and that was my world.
Okay. So you set out to be a software engineer there?
I left from here because in those days, this was 1989, you would not have got a visa unless you were going for either medical science, engineering, or software.
Correct.
So the I-20 visa, which is the holy grail that everyone wanted in those days. So that they wouldn't give you a visa if you were going for arts and all that. Yeah. So I went on a software ticket. So I got to the US, and my first semester, of course, I was taking software classes, and then I realized you need math and calculus and all of this stuff, which is, I see that stuff and I start sweating. So I very clearly, after the first semester, I got C's and D's. I was like, I'm done with this. And, along with that, I was taking electives because I was interested in politics and stuff like that. So started taking these history and politics classes, and I was like, okay, that's my world now. So I switched immediately.
Interesting. But you mentioned when we were talking earlier that you started cooking at 7.
Yes. So my mom, everybody has that same story of my mother is a wonderful cook. But I mean, which is always almost true. My mother was a really good cook, and she was really interested in making sure that all 3 of us knew how to cook, 3 brothers. Because my mom was always a working mom. Dad was working means he was a workaholic, so we hardly even saw him. He was traveling most of the time. So we were left to our own devices here and there. So she just made it a point to always show us how to cook. So all the way from like when I'd say my earliest memory is about when I was about 7 years old, making pizza. When I mean pizza, I use that term very loosely. So around from there, and then watching her cook, and then just figuring out how things work, which is what I suppose the wonderful legacy she left me.
I have a 13-year-old daughter. So this COVID, we had this... kids are locked in at home, there are no friends, and I live in an independent house. So there are no other friends that you can hang out with. So there was this really creative cooking class for 6 months, which is called the Science of Cooking.
Okay.
So the youngest there was like around 10-year-old boy from Chandigarh or something.
Right.
And the oldest was like 14 years or something like that.
Okay.
And they had to do everything, right? From cutting your vegetables to the oven to managing the stove and mixer and everything.
Right.
And they teach you the chemistry behind things, alkaline, acidity. And I've seen this chef evolve in my house. So now I've made an offer to her that when I retire, I need a Michelin star restaurant running at home. Plating, everything has to be perfect. And so I've seen her then sort of evolve from a recipe-based thing to her own.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. She tests each flavor. She sees how it blends with the other flavors that are there. It's a very creative space, isn't it? So
it is. I mean, the one regret I have, because I have a BA in international relations and an MA in history. The one thing I regret not doing, because what I should have done is, by which then I came back to India and I was like, hey, I want to do what I'm doing right now. So, but what I miss, what I think I miss, I still miss that is having some formal education, and which means the chemistry of food, how things work. Now, I'm fortunate in the sense that I sense that. I mean, I have a sense of that, but I can't formulate it into actual, say actual words. Or, I know when something needs a little more acidity or something needs a little more bitter, or whatever it may be, but I don't have any training in that. It's just something that I can feel. So if I had that at your daughter's age, I think I'd be much better than I am today. So she's on the right wicket.
So tell me one thing. One of the things you were talking about was also about the lab. It got me interested. You got the food lab?
Okay, right, yeah. You're talking about the Kenji?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So where you sort of ideate and test your products and build your products, right? So walk me through, what is a creative journey there? What goes in your mind?
I always think about that. I always think about, like, for example, 2 days ago I made a sauce. Now, it can be as stupid as me waking up in the morning and opening my fridge and looking, because I keep buying stuff. I keep buying ingredients. I'll see something that either reading Kenji Lopez's book or watching something on YouTube, and I'll just look at an ingredient. I'm like, I can use that somehow. So my fridge is always stuffed with all kinds of weird stuff. Can you use bad language?
Yeah.
Not bad language, but all kinds of shit in the fridge. So
started off with the ass, you remember?
Oh yeah, that's right. So so like 2 days ago, I opened the fridge and I had a bottle of miso. And I had some akuni, which is the fermented soybeans from Nagaland. And I'm like, what should I do? And then I had fermented a bunch of chilies. So which was just, I fermented it, made the sour mash, and then I stopped the fermentation because it was getting too much. But I wasn't ready to do anything with it, so I just put it in the fridge. So, and then it just clicked. I was like, these 3 things will go well together. And then I tried something. So it can be as simple as that, waking up in the morning and just, let's just try this. And all the way to planning something 1 month ahead of time, where I will really consciously think about something, constantly try different iterations of it until I get it to the point.
And then you sort of write it down, or
I'm terrible at that, at documentation. In fact, I used to insist on that in my restaurants, but I'm terrible at it because I'm not formally trained. So everything's just in my head, which is so, it's there. I know proportions, everything's there, but I'm terrible at writing down and documenting, which I should. People keep telling me I should write a cookbook.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything more intimidating than that. Because I'm like, I don't know how I'd write it. Although there's a chef called Fergus Henderson. Have you heard of him, right?
Yeah,
this guy you should read his cookbooks. I mean, that's the kind of cookbook I want to write. There are no proportions. His recipes read like a Indian grandmother's recipes.
Yeah.
One pinch of this and a sniff of that. And, so that, if I write that, but then he's Fergus Henderson, he can do that.
But that's your Gautam.
Oh yeah, maybe at some point. But everybody wants, because I've realized that when people want recipes and they want documentation, they want especially people who are intimidated by cooking. They want very clear, precise directions, and it's hard for me to do that. So, let's see.
So you've been the first cloud kitchen experimenter way back, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I was the first, but certainly. I mean, we opened this place called Asiana Box, which was, I'd say, 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
Which was, at that point, I remember the whole idea was that, because if you're in the restaurant world, when you come home, the last thing you want to do is cook.
Yeah.
So takeout becomes your best friend. And in those days, there was no Swiggy, no nothing, right? So you'd call the local greasy Indian Chinese joint, because I love my fried rice and chili chicken. But the more I ate that, the more I realized how bad that food is. I mean, it's just terribly cornflour laden, batter fried crap. But in the middle of the night, you don't care and you just order that stuff, but it always end up getting sick. Blah, blah. So anyway, long story short, I'm like, there's a market for this, for good Asian food, delivered to your house on your doorstep, but not necessarily, you don't need a brick and mortar place that you can, it's just a pure delivery model. And I remember talking to my partner about it, and he was like, no, you need to have a space. And I'm like, no, just try this. And because investment is low, you don't need staff. I mean, you just need a kitchen staff and a few delivery boys. So we set it up, and it turned out to be a fantastic hit. And of course,
you didn't have phones, nothing back then. How were you managing it?
Just landlines. I mean, by which time I had a mobile phone. But you're right. I mean, but for my staff, the mobile phones in those days were like 15,000, 20,000 rupees for a basic one.
Right.
And so it's not like we were going to give our boys phones and all that. We worked on landlines. So we installed 4 Airtel landlines at the location. And we had 4 people on the phones taking orders. And of course, but no way to track them, nothing. So once the thing leaves your restaurant, that's it. So let's just hope it gets there. But
so you had to figure out packaging as well, right? Or
so
transport?
We had, absolutely. So we, I come back from the US, so your Chinese, those basic Chinese, those boxes. So we had a really good designer who worked with us, who did all the entire motif for Talp. I don't know if it's all the Japanese anime sort of stuff. So he designed all of it for us. So in those days it was pretty neat. No one was doing stuff like that.
So was the art in Talp also from him?
Yeah. This guy called Jacob Atakaran, who's now quit the business, and we're all very angry because he's so good at it. Now he does some other, I don't even know what he does.
Oh, he doesn't do the artwork anymore.
Yeah, I think he's just got into some weird website food thing and all that. So, but I keep telling him, because he's still a good friend, and get back into this, he was so good at it.
The artwork was really nice.
So the cloud, I mean, the word cloud kitchen also didn't exist then. It was just a delivery kitchen, and people used to always say, where is your restaurant? And that was a difficult conversation to have. Difficult in the sense that they couldn't understand that we were just delivery. That, no, we'd like to come and sit. And I'm like, no, we don't have a space. We just can only order in. So I suppose, I don't know if I was the first, but certainly one among the first in Bangalore, at least.
Yeah, so. For me, you were the only one.
Thank you.
I think in Bangalore. I think for me, I followed you throughout every restaurant of yours. Your beef dishes, the combination of spice and that fermenting is like, oh. And then I'm a hardcore non-vegetarian, but you even make vegetarian food taste
so
amazing.
There's a bit of typecasting with me. I mean, Well, I started off life as a Thai chef. I mean, Southeast Asian food. So for a long time, that's all people knew me as. I mean, and then of course I got into Talp, which was the burger, blah, 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 comfort food sort of stuff, and then of course Smoke Company. But the common theme throughout has been meat, right? So that typecast has always been there. But I'm just one of those people. I love my vegetables. I really do, and I actually eat a lot of vegetables at home. And even if I order a shitty takeout, there'll be some vegetarian dish also along with that. So I make it a point. So, for example, Smoke Company, it was a bit hard to convince vegetarians to come there, obviously, because it was geared around the whole idea of smoking meat. But I made a huge effort on the vegetarian menu. Almost 40% of Smoke Company's menu was vegetarian.
Yeah.
So, and we did a check, every time a vegetarian would order, I make it a point for either me or my staff to go and talk to them and say, how is it? And 9 times out of 10 walked away very happy. Wasn't just some token noodles that you gave them sort of thing. So I do enjoy making vegetarian food as well.
So your names of your companies are again very interesting. The Talp and Smoked Company and Asia in a Box, and even the one on MG Road, right?
Thai. So the first restaurant I started was a place called Thai. So that is what my nieces used to call me. So it just when they were babies, that's Thai. So even now, that's what they call me, and it kind of fit in to the Thai, that whole thing. Of course, people just thought, why is he calling it Thai? But it was T-A-I-T-A-I, not T-H-I, T-H-A-I. So, what was I saying? So it just kind of went. So that was the first name that I had, and then we had a bar called Maya. Since then, I have to be honest with you, I could care less what my restaurants are called. I actually don't give a shit. Okay, so Talp was this friend of mine from the US. He's this guy who been living in the US for 20 years, but he's one of those aching for India, but will never come back. He's just that type, right? So when he comes to India, he's always like, everything is nostalgia for him. So one day we were sitting and I was telling him about starting this place, and he was like, you should call it Talp. So I said, I hadn't heard that word in a long time. Because Talp kind of went out of the vernacular.
It's like the I'll Talp you sort of thing.
Right. So Talp, so when I was like, so it's like for me, and then I thought about it, and I'm like, it means two things. It means either to beat someone up, or it means to eat a lot. It's like, go Talp some biryani, or just have a fight with biryani, essentially. So I was like, it sounds good, and I feel like it's a catchy kind of word. So we tried it, and of course my partner was like, people I talked to about it, they were like, oh, what a strange name. But I have to say it was an amazing choice, because even today, I mean, we're now been closed 3.5 years, and people still remember it, and people still talk about it, and people still I still see threads on Twitter and stuff like that. Just recently there was a Best Burgers in Bangalore, and then at least 4 people had mentioned like, I wish Talp was still there. So the recall value was great. So it was a good choice. Asia in a Box was,
Have you ever thought when you close a restaurant, it's like a one-way relationship and you've broken the relationship? Have you ever thought of that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but
let me explain.
Okay.
So for me, like for example, I go to restaurants I'm very comfortable with.
Right.
And while I like to experiment,
right,
there are certain foods I look forward to, I long for, and I repeatedly go there.
Got it.
So that relationship just gets knocked off when a restaurant closes. Because then you're like, now what?
Now what do I do when I want that particular thing?
Yeah.
But you mean me personally, with other restaurants, do I have that?
No, you.
Okay.
Like your restaurants and the relationship the customers have with your restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that because I know, the heartbeat of a restaurant is its regulars, right? Yeah. And the regulars come for their regular food. I mean, that's why you call them regulars. They're not coming to try all your new experiments. I mean, they might once in a way, like you said, but most of them are coming to eat that spare rib, or they're coming to eat that one burger. They always, I would look at KOTs from on our system for Talp, and you will see the same order over and over again. I mean, not just one person. It'll be like cheeseburger, French fries, milkshake, cheeseburger, French fries.
Yes.
I mean, literally 90% of the KOTs were that.
Yes.
And then, of course, here and there some pasta and
Yes.
whatever. But
Yes.
I mean, and then you realize that's what people are coming for. So when we cut off Talp, there was a huge blowback. I mean, in terms of all the way from sadness to anger to,
Yeah.
I mean, all kinds of stuff. And even now I still get, when are you going to open again?
Yeah.
Or why did you close? Now I have to deal with all this rubbish burgers and blah, blah, and all that stuff. So, yeah, so there is a definite breaking of some relationship once you close something down, which is sad, I suppose. But also, and it's also uplifting because you're like, yes, people liked what I do.
Yeah, yeah. So, in terms of the ingredients, do you source it from everywhere or how do you go about? Back then, it must have been harder as well, right?
Absolutely. So, especially for doing Thai food in the early 2000s, there was literally no sauce. I mean, I used to travel to Thailand to buy fish sauce and buy curry paste. And
that's the excuse you gave.
Yeah. So, like, mine was always a half and half, go to Thailand for a bit of R&R as well as sourcing. So, literally, for the basic building blocks of Thai food were not available here.
Yeah.
You'd be lucky if you got some oyster sauce back then.
Yeah.
So, in those days, so there was a bit of trouble sourcing ingredients. But as time progressed, by the time 2010, late 2000s, everything was pretty much available here. What I do is, in terms of the rest of the other ingredients, and I don't want to sound like some cliched chef and all that. I'm going to take off my jacket. But I try to keep it local as much as possible. So, not that I do that, 10-kilometer radius. So I don't do that. But 9 times out of 10, the whatever I'm using will be from Bangalore or Karnataka.
Okay.
I try to keep it and it's not because of there is a element of being proud of where you're from, but also it's convenience.
Yeah.
And consistency of supply.
Yeah.
If I'm worrying about some herb that I have to get from Delhi or even from outside the country, then I can't plan a menu around that. I got to plan a menu on something I can get regularly.
Yeah. Is your cooking minimalistic? Like, do you sort of explore adding different ingredients and making it more complex, or is it more minimalistic?
It depends on what I'm doing. So, like, for example, Thai food, I'd say, was fairly minimalistic because you are using similar, almost like 4 or 5 ingredients, basic building blocks of that cuisine all the time, and then here and there you might layer something onto it. When I'm doing, for example, the thing I'm doing right now, which is creating sauces, condiments, then it becomes a lot more complex because you're really trying to create. There are 1,000 sauces in the market. You're always trying to distinguish yourself. So, like I told you about that pepper mash and the akuni. So, trying to create something. And so, for example, that sauce I was making, it took me a while to get it to the point where I wanted it to be, and which meant adding layers and layers, more of this, less of that, or balance when something gets out of whack, bringing it back down. So there's quite a process involved. Whereas making a simple stir fry is quicker. And minimal effort. So it really depends on what I'm doing.
And when you look at products, you create these products. Are there products that you started off way back when you started your career that's still on, and then there are newer products that you're adding? Or let me ask the context of why I'm asking this, right? So when I ran Bubble Wrap, I ran this thing called Gifting and Experience. Because we're all about, materialistic. We sort of live in a very materialistic world.
Sure.
But for me, it's always been experiences. It sort of creates memories. It could be smell, it could be, different things that sort of remind you of, that time.
Right.
So that was a whole experience. But then, when you do too much customization, it's not a sustainable model.
Obviously.
It's about how quickly you can productize things and the repeatability of it, and how quickly can you scale it as well.
Exactly.
Right? So how do you go about productizing?
Yeah, so the quick answer to that would be what sells, right? So, if it's something that I see that people are constantly asking me for, then of course that whole process of streamlining the process, making it every time exactly the same way. So a case in point would be the chili oil that I make these days. I don't deviate from that recipe ever. So for the past whatever 1.5 years that I've been making it, it's exactly the same. And then so therefore, and I've also realized that's a product I can scale now. So if, for example, now that's the only thing I keep in stock. I make large batches of it, and of course that lal salam chili sauce.
Yeah.
So 2 or 3 things I know that people will always want it, so therefore I need to scale it up and I need to keep stock.
Got it.
So it all depends on demand at the end of the day, whether people like it or not, and are constantly, regularly asking for it. But there are also products that I make one-offs of, that I know that, for example, that sauce I made 3 days ago, I know not a lot of people will like it, because it's very funky and it's got, crazy amount of fermenty, fishy, umami flavors. So it's a niche product. So therefore, I don't see it unless scaling it up will just, and it's happened before. Like I've made this thing out of fermented jackfruit, the tempoyak.
Yeah.
So I made it because in my mind, it's a chef's problem. It happens on menus where you think of something and you think, wow, this is the best fucking thing I've ever made in my life.
Yeah.
And people are just going to love it.
Yeah.
And I put it out there and, 4 people order it. And, you're left with, all your stock.
Are you serious? You just had a small...
The tempoyak, I made 35 bottles of it. I sold about 8.
No way.
Yeah. So the rest of it went into, I made some other stuff. Basically, was I realized that, and then I was like, okay, let me try this again. I made it twice.
Yeah.
Same thing again.
Yeah.
So people, first of all, jackfruit. So people have this thing. There's you're either a jackfruit lover. There are 2 types of people in the world: one who likes jackfruit and one who doesn't. So long answer to that is just depends on what it is, and some things are amenable to scaling up. Which are easy on the palate. Everybody loves chili oil. Who doesn't, especially in India? But not everybody loves the tempoyak.
But you do have a good sense of who your customer is. You've got that clarity. I think that's one thing I observe in talking to you. Over the last 20 plus years, you've actually been able to identify the niche correctly and really understand that customer base.
Absolutely. Right? So, of course, that's also been my Achilles heel, which is because it is a fairly small crowd.
Yeah.
So, therefore, to build a large restaurant, which high investment, around that one small crowd, doesn't always translate into good business. So, that has been a problem. But also, like you said, I'm very clear on what the people who enjoy what I do. I'm very clear about who they are and what they like. And so for me, and they understand me, I understand them. So if I'm going to be trying something new, these people will come along with me. I know that. Not everybody, but this core crowd will always come. So you have an understanding of what, and that's nice when you're on the same wavelength with your customer. So
who's that customer? Can you define that persona?
Very hard, depending on what I'm doing. So, for example, I'd say with the smoke company, it would be, very cliched people who love a good cut of meat. As simple as that. That's all they care about. They don't give a shit about the sides that I'm giving them or any of that stuff. So, from that point of view, it's very clear this is the kind of guy he is. A guy, and mostly guys in that world, I have to say.
Oh, really?
It is a kind of a weird, that whole baking, roasting and curing, and because the perception is that it's a man's thing to do, and so I'm always excited when women.
Oh, really?
Women like my food.
I thought you were a big hit with women.
Yeah. So over the years, that changed. This whole meat, because it is, and it's a stereotype that has no basis in reality, I believe. But people just play to stereotypes sometimes. So a couple will come and it's just weird. It happens that maybe she wants the pork ribs, but she won't order it. It's a strange thing. Whereas the guy will order it, and then they'll share. And then she'll be, wow, it's wonderful. But there's this weird kind of stupid rule too that a woman should order the salad and blah 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 and all that nonsense, which turns out to be not true at all. Right? Yeah. But it's still there. That weird leftover lizard brain part of us that just say that this is the way it should be.
So when you start thinking of a concept and start building this. And having run so many restaurants and each of a different caliber itself, right? If you actually look at it, Thai was very, very niche.
Right.
The ambience was really very cool and thing. And Thalp was more your craving food sort of
Comfort
thing. But
sort of
again, the ambience was different.
Right.
And then Smoke Company was like a top-notch
Right,
thing.
exactly.
But when you visualize this, your customer base is also sort of changing.
Absolutely.
And thereby customer behavior as well.
Absolutely.
Tell me what has been your experience with various customer pools?
The first Thai was 2005, right? 2005, 2006. I always get those mixed up. Anyway, so those were the days. I mean, I was doing catering and things like that, but I was catering to 1% of Bangalore. That is the rich people who wanted, a personal chef to come home. So from 2001 to 2005, that's what I was doing. So I was hanging around in that world with rich people's houses, sitting in their kitchens, cooking food while they got drunk, and I gave them food at the end of the night, right? So for me, in my mind, that's the kind of restaurant I should open. So Thai was an extension of that, hey, we must open a fancy restaurant. And also those are the days of, Ferran Adria and blah, blah. So everything had to be beautifully plated and foams and this and emulsions and all of that stuff. So that restaurant was a definite me going like, hey, that's what we need to do, which is very, very far from what I am today. But there was a bit of pretentiousness to that restaurant also. I mean, I'm the first to admit that. But it was also good food. So the audience for that was a very particular kind of audience, who in those days were people who had traveled. There weren't a lot of people traveling internationally in those days. So that was my crowd. It was, I have to say, a very niche crowd, an upper middle class to rich. That was my audience, and I catered to them fully, fancy wines and blah, 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 and all that stuff. As time went by, I realized that, there's other things I want to do, and there are other audiences I want to tap into. So Talp and Asian Box was quite the opposite.
Yeah, it is.
Which was quite the proletariat food sort of thing, which was catering to an audience that, first of all, couldn't afford fancy food, but who wanted good food. And intuitively, I knew they existed. I mean, I didn't know anything. I didn't know any market research or any such thing. But I figured that there is a crowd out there that wants good quality food at a decent, affordable price. So then obviously the entire audience changes. So Talp was, I think we talked about that earlier, was, very clearly college kids. Middle class families who wanted to take their kids out for a burger and a pizza or whatever, right? So that was a whole different audience, and who were not there for their fancy interiors, or they were all for alcohol or anything like that. They were just there to have a good meal at a good price. Everybody goes home happy. So that was that audience. And then Smoke Company was a weird hybrid of the two, I believe. Although it was an expensive restaurant, but the food was not. It was much more mass-oriented food. Big cuts of meat and hearty portions and. Not beautiful plated things. It was all.
I think that's what I loved about your restaurants. The size is not like you finish a bite and it's like, oh, it's over.
Exactly. Right. So this is in fact, I wish my partner was here, because he would say this is a constant battle. That he would say, like, dude, do you really need to give that much food? Can we keep our cost? Because costing, which is why I'm not that great of a businessman. Because for me, this is a lot to do with my time in America too. I mean, you live there, so you realize what portion sizes in America are ridiculous.
Huge.
I mean, I mean, the 10 years I lived there, I never got used to that. That a pizza, a small pizza there is a 12-inch pizza. It's huge. That's a large pizza here. So I never got used to that. But clearly in my head, that's what people want. So I got associated with that, especially with Talp. I mean, Thai was what you were talking about, 2 bites and you're done. I mean, literally, it's thin shavings of stuff and all of that stuff. But Talp certainly was large portions, and that translated all the way down to Asian Box and then, of course, Smoke Company.
So when you were doing this catering to the rich, tell me, when you walk into a rich man or a woman's house, what's the experience? What are some really? Okay, wow.
I'm sure people will listen to this if some of the people I used to cook for. But I'll tell you something that I don't know if this is connected to what we are talking about, but it was an eye-opening experience on how of the haves and have-nots of India. It really, I always tell people, like, you don't know how people are until you see the way they treat the help. And whoever works for them. And rich people will generally have more help than they need, number one. Number two, and how they treat them. And it was, I had to stop myself from getting angry
Yeah.
at some level, all the way from not allowing them to eat on the same plates,
Yeah.
had to cook separately. Uniforms, I mean, like archaic bullshit like that. So that was always my first thing. Is like, okay, so there, of course, there were exceptions to that, friends of mine and all who were fine, but by and large, it was an eye-opening experience in terms, because when you're in somebody's house and in the kitchen, you get to see stuff that that they won't normally allow you to see, right?
Yeah.
When you go to, say, as a guest.
Because you're actually going to the heart of the house, right?
Exactly. I mean, you can tell a lot about somebody by the contents of their fridge.
Yes. Oh, you will be surprised. It's empty. My fridge is so empty.
Mine is jammed. So, yeah, it was quite nice. I mean, so, not great experiences always. I mean, at that point I was, and also I'd say like half the time I was cooking food that for drunk people.
Yeah.
Which is no fun,
Yeah.
because you've put all this time and effort into something that you think is wonderful, and then at 2 a.m. the guy is like drunk off his ass and he's shoving it down his gob, and you're just like, you can't even taste it, and he's not enjoying it. He's just like, I want something. And I've been that guy.
Yeah.
At 2 a.m. after a couple of smokes and drinks, you just want some stuff to eat.
True.
Spicier the better, blah blah blah, that stuff. So it wasn't always a good experience. But it was good, got me to where I am, I suppose.
But that must have been like a humbling experience as well, right? Or what were you going through? Because as a creator, you're taking a lot of pride in what you're doing.
Exactly.
And then it could be a hit or miss,
Absolutely,
depending on whose house you're walking into.
Yeah. So, well, I have enough confidence in myself that I would be like, they're going to like it. I mean, that's what keeps me going even now. I'm like, no matter what I do, enough people are going to like what I do. And in those days, like I think we talked about this word of mouth. So whoever house I was cooking it has either tried it somewhere else, tried what I've made somewhere else, or I'd been recommended. So by and large, not by and large, I'd say I never had any negative feedback. Other than the, food was late or things like that, like sometimes, get there late or whatever. So by and large, it was always a fairly good experience. But humbling in the sense that, I mean, you know how it is in India, like, I'm cooked in somebody's kitchen. I just come back from America with an MA. And now suddenly I'm one of the help in somebody's house. Cooking, and I'm sitting in the kitchen. Of course, people are quite nice also. They invite me to join the party, and that's not me. So I'd be in the back having a cigarette while waiting for them. So there was a bit of that whole dignity of labor to get over. Just like, I'm just this guy sitting in somebody's kitchen, cooking for them like just some servant, All those thoughts go through your head. And I use that word servant very deliberately, because in those days that's a thing going through your head, right?
Because back then the concept of a chef also was not that
it
big,
wasn't a big thing, and I was nobody in there. Nobody, with the small circle of Bangalore, I was known. That was it.
True.
So from that point of view, it was. I did learn how to be a little more humble, to use your word, by just getting down to the brass tacks of just cooking for people, and then shutting that part of my mind off, which is like, hey, you're doing something creative and you're doing something good, and people like what you do. So
is that where you had a clarity of what is the purposeful nature in which you're going to engage going forward, or you always had that clarity, Gautam?
No. When I was doing that catering bit, I had no thoughts of opening a restaurant. To be very frank, this was something I think I told you. It was something number one, to get my dad off my case, because I'd come back from the US and I was all set. I got admission to go back for my PhD and all of that stuff. And then I just one day woke up and I said, I can't do it. I don't want to go back. And having to tell my dad that, because my dad and my mom are very open people, but at the same time, parents, they want you to get a good education and get a good job and all of that stuff. So this was something I started really just to get, not entirely, but to like tell the world at large that, okay, I'm doing something, not just living off my parents and drinking beers at Bangalore Club. That was my life for a while, literally doing nothing, and while my parents paid for everything. So it
was
started
this like
as
a temporary gig in that case?
Absolutely, it started off as something to just do while I figured out what I wanted to do. Whether I would actually maybe I wanted to go back to the US. I was in the right space. I mean, all those thoughts were. In fact, I had a I always call that the crossroads of my life. I did a lot of my study in Middle Eastern politics. So,
interesting.
So I'm fairly left wing. So for me, Palestinian, that stuff, and so Israel was something that was a really interesting place for me. So I was like, because I was pro-Palestinian, but certainly I had enough of an education to realize that you need to know both sides of the issue. So I always was really interested. I mean, still now I follow Israeli politics a lot.
It sort of shapes the world's politics in a lot of ways,
Exactly,
isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. So my thing was, and so I had a friend in the US who had gone to live in a kibbutz there, and she came back changed. I mean, literally, I could see a huge change in terms of confidence and how to deal with the world. And she just always spoke about that experience in glowing terms. So I was like, hey, that's what, maybe I'll do that. So while all this catering thing was going on, I started exploring going to a kibbutz. And so I wrote to them and all this stuff. So I found this in a place called Eilat, which is by the ocean. I was like, hey, nice beach also. And they said, yeah, come. So I got it all set up. And it was going to go for a year. And everything set up, went to the Israeli embassy, and they said, no, then give me a visa.
They rejected.
Yeah. So because apparently during that time, they had an immigration problem with Indians going and not coming back. Who knew? So they said, we'll give you a 2-week tourist visa. You can go and come. So I remember going like, no, that's not why I want to go. So I didn't go. And I always think that has been the point in my life as things, I mean, if I had gone, perhaps none of this would have happened.
Road not taken, no?
Maybe I would have just gone into an entirely different world, back into the political world or what have you. So that just never happened. So, and I still haven't made it to Israel. So maybe someday.
So then, does that mean then you gradually sort of fine-tune purpose for you?
Right. So, in fact, after that point I'm talking about, then I started realizing, okay, so, and by which time a decent amount of money was coming in through this hobby that became a business, that stopgap arrangement became hey, now I can actually, I remember I made enough money now to move out of my parents' house and I could afford to pay rent, on my own. And so that, of course, my dad still had to pay the deposit for the flat. I'll admit to that. But certainly that was a great feeling because I went from being very independent in the US to very dependent when I came back and then back into this. So at that point, I remember thinking, okay, now this can be something. This can be something permanent. That this could be what I am now. I think at that point is when I moved out of my parents' house, when I realized that this could be something. But still no restaurant. I wasn't thinking about any restaurants. That happened much later, and really from a lot of pressure from people. Yeah.
To really start something because you're good at this.
Because it seemed that for them it was a natural progression. Yeah. I've been very happy to just continue doing that, which is what I'm doing now, actually.
Taking a quick break from our conversation today, I wanted to quickly talk about our collaboration partner, Hubhopper. This podcast was created at Hubhopper Studio. If you wish to start your own podcast for free, please visit www.hubhopperstudio.com. Hubhopper is India's leading podcast creation platform. Start your podcast with Hubhopper Studio and get your voice heard across platforms like Spotify, Gaana, Google Podcasts, Wink Music, and many more. Click on the link in the episode description or visit hubhopperstudio.com. Thank you, Hubhopper, for the collaboration. And now we go back to our conversation. And when you actually went through this journey, we were talking about this. India as a country has evolved. Like post 91, we've actually transformed ourselves a lot more.
Right.
And Bangalore has actually evolved a lot.
Right.
We were talking about this the other day about how you still think it's a small town,
right?
But yet the evolution has been, still going through. Was that instrumental in leading you towards a restaurant, setting up a restaurant? Or what led you to move from this independent gig that you were doing to, okay, I'm going to now rent out a place, I'm going to hire people, train them?
Combination of one of the things was, like I told you, there was a bit of pressure because I was catering for a certain type of people who had a lot of money. And one of them had a lot of money and who was very interested in starting a restaurant. So he started, and it took a good 8 months for him to convince me. So, because in my mind, I'm like, I can't start a restaurant. I don't know the first thing about running a business or starting a restaurant. Right now, I have to deal with me, my dad's driver, who was my assistant, and my dad's maid, who was my sous chef. That's it. That was my world. And, I'd pay them X amount, and that was it. I didn't have to worry about anything else. No overheads, no shit. So this guy convinced me. So that amount of pressure, that was one part of it. The second part was, in my mind, logic dictated that there's a natural progression to this, that, you do this now, you establish yourself, people like your food, now let's start a brick and mortar place. And so that, a combination of both of those things, I'd say, was what prompted me to take that step. And I also admit a great amount of overconfidence. It's always been some problem with me. But, it's the best food in the world. They're going to love it. So I might as well do it.
No,
which I've become a little bit better now.
Yeah, I carry that confidence. I've never done podcasting, but I like conversations, so it's going to be the best. And I'm like, and then I have self-doubts, but that's just me having self-doubts on my own.
That's in the back, exactly.
But I know what you're saying. Yeah,
exactly.
So in this process, my chain of thoughts is gone. So what I was trying to find is the most important thing for someone who's really thinking of doing this, kitchen catering business of sorts, is to not think big, is to not think fancy logos and website and all that stuff. Get your products together, get your basic shit together, get that scaling, and then there are avenues that open up. Is that the best advice? Or would you sort of suggest a different route?
No, I'll tell you from my mistakes. I mean, so for example, Thai was a complete unmitigated disaster. Purely because it was I went from, like I told you, catering for 25 people to running, at that time we invested, I think it was like 3.5 crores. 2006, right? Around there. It was a lot of money during that time. Running a restaurant of, a small restaurant, but a huge bar. And so I went straight from that to this. I mean, like, I went from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. And it was the most stupid thing I ever did. Although I'm very proud of what I did, but I'm not proud of the business per se, because I clearly had no idea of how to run a business, right? And in those days, I didn't have a partner or anything. It was my investor and me. And my investor gave me the money and said, okay, now you're on your own. Of course, he would help as well with questions that I had, but he runs a multi-billion-dollar business. He has no time for my bullshit, you know? So I would say starts for. So for example, Tulp was the opposite of that, where we started very small. Like I said, took a small little kitchen and then slowly but surely expanded, and slowly but surely it became a success. And so you can see the whole difference in approach. I mean, one was bam, start everything fancy, this, that, bar, thinking that you're going to attract this fancy audience, and very clearly that's not the case. Whereas if you have a good product, slowly but surely build it up, and then you have something. Then you have a winner on your hands. And then, of course, I didn't learn my lesson again. I mean, smoke company was, again, we did that stupid shit. Because by which time this bit of overconfidence happens, like, hey, Gautam Krishnankutty is at a restaurant, everyone will come. Not realizing that my audience, while loyal and wonderful, is small. It's not a huge audience. So the smoke company was a massive undertaking, right? I mean, it was 8,000 or 9,000 square feet restaurant.
Huge and very nicely done.
3 floors, beautifully done, blah, 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 but just very clearly I didn't have the audience for it, enough of an audience for it. We won awards and all that stuff, but that didn't translate into day-to-day operations.
So you were not able to break even, or were you able to break even?
We broke even, I think, a couple of months. That's about it.
Yeah?
Yeah, other than that, it was a loss-making business. I mean, so it wasn't fun. It was great to realize something that was in my head. So if in retrospect, I look back on it, my partner will agree with me that we should have actually done exactly what we did with Tulp. We started as a small scale and then slowly scaled it up. So, which is still a possibility, because I know that the potential for that is there. But let's see.
You sort of summed lean startup in this experience, right? So
absolutely,
it's not like you're writing off starting another restaurant. It's not like you're writing off any of that, but it's about the learnings and how you sort of imbibe into that.
And now even more so, considering the state of the world today. I mean, you'd be stupid to start something. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack when I hear about these guys opening 10,000 square feet breweries, and I've been to a few of them, they're empty. I mean, if your restaurant is full on a Saturday night, it means nothing to me. When I say, if your restaurant is full on a Tuesday night, then you've got something going.
Yeah.
So 9 times out of 10, I go to these places and they're empty. Because I don't go on weekends, because I hate that crowd. So, in fact, I'm very happy in some weird, horrible sense that if it's empty, it's nice for me as a customer, because I'm on the other side of the fence now. But I also feel so bad for them, because I'm looking at them and they're all, and they have, 30 staff, and I know I'm doing the calculations in my head of salary and power and rent and blah blah, and I 100% know it. They're not hitting those targets. So I always feel like I don't know what you're thinking when you're doing things like that, and given the current climate,
So I have a concept called the fuck off fund. Where you literally have that fuck off fund to say, you go fuck yourself. This is what I'm going to do.
Right.
Did you have, or did you always have this company of investors that was much more accessible for you, or did you plan a fuck off fund for yourself when you started this journey and when you went through this journey?
I didn't entirely understand what you mean, but like, as in, like, me personally having a fund?
Yeah.
No, I'm terrible with money. So I've never, I'm just one of those people that, as long as my basic needs are taken care of, I don't really care about, so I'm terrible at saving and, so mine is, I had that investor, he's still a very good friend of the family and all of that stuff. So he was there. So for me in my mind, and my partner is his brother, so it's always there. So I didn't have to worry about money. Touch wood, they've been really good to me, the entire family. So even when things are bad, they always supported me. So I never had to worry too much, which I should have, actually. In retrospect, I should have had a fuck off fund. I still should have one. I should probably start. Maybe I'll start that now.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it a fuck off fund too. So no. The answer to that question is no, I've never had that.
No, because I'll tell you, for me, coming from a research or a tech background, the sort of ability it gives you is to really say, this is what I like to do.
Right.
I don't want to do these.
Right.
And so I'm okay.
Well, I suppose at some level, that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
In a sense that my needs, like I told you, I have basic needs.
Exactly.
I want a big screen TV, I've got that. I can't think of, because I love my movies and all, so I can't think of huge amounts of expenditure that I require.
Yes.
As long as my rent and basics are taken care of, I can have a drink once in a while, have a nice phone, whatever. So that's enough.
Yes.
So therefore now, whatever I'm making financially today, most of it is actually is savings now, because I'm not spending it really.
Exactly.
Not traveling anymore. I'm sure everybody's expenditures has come down. Yeah. And so therefore now my flexibility seems to be much higher. So therefore I can actually now, that's what I'm doing now. I only do what I want to do. True. I refuse to take direction from anyone else.
Exactly.
I get calls from all these people I used to cook for who think I'm still doing the same thing. But I am, but not really. Yeah. Those days anything they wanted. Yes, can you make this with chicken? Can you make this with can you do this vegetarian?
Have you made butter chicken?
I used to cook for a Jain family, Thai food. These days, I used to make curry paste without garlic.
Oh no.
And just because they paid well, they were a very rich Jain family. It was a weird, speaking of servants and all that. That particular family, I would never work for them again today.
Everybody is a chotu.
Because they were just not good people. Yeah. But so those days I would, whatever you wanted, I would do. Yeah. Whereas now I don't. Because I have the experience to say, and of course a certain amount of a reputation to say, no, I'm not going to do that.
True.
So even now I still get calls, can you make the rendang with chicken? I'm like, no, that's not how it's made, and I never will do it. I never will.
Yeah.
And I have that ability now. So I don't know if it's a fuck off fund in terms of finances, but in terms of my ability to say, I only do what I want to do.
I think the idea is also, notionally, it is about a combination of my strengths. So I want to do this. This is my strengths. I know who I am.
Right.
And this is my strengths.
Right.
So I want to do this.
Right.
It's also in order to be able to say that, am I having liabilities here? Which I have to still take care of.
Exactly.
Because if I have those liabilities, then somewhere I will be tempted.
Exactly. Right? And as of now, thank God, I've achieved that that kind of balance where I don't need to worry too much about my personal financial health.
True.
So I don't really, I mean, who doesn't? Everybody thinks I'd like to make more and more and more.
Yeah.
But as of now, I'm okay. I mean, and I credit to people that trust me, right? To trust me to pay what I ask for, whatever it may be. Yeah. And so I don't have to worry too much as of now. Who knows?
So I'm going to switch gear into the training aspect, right? We talked about that extensively. Like, there's a certain, when you walk into Gautam's restaurants, there's a certain quality, there's a certain experience, whether it is the artwork, whether it is the well thought through engagement model you've put in for kids, for example, in Tal, or even Thai Thai, or even Smoke Company, the music, the lighting. There's a certain thing that you have. So first, let's talk about the employees who are working for Gautam. What's that kind of journey one would go through when they're working with you? Is it, what kind of training investment goes in there?
A huge amount, because if there's one thing I've learned about myself is that I'm a very good, I'm a good teacher. I mean, that's what I wanted to do before I started this cooking thing. So I know that in my head, I know how to explain conceptually how I want things to be to people, and I feel like I'm good at communicating that to people and for them to get it. So which means that the training, and purely because in the restaurant world, training is, to me, is everything. I mean, you can't just hire a guy and expect him to do what you want to do. Your vision needs to get into his head. And so therefore, the only way to do that is training. And training doesn't happen overnight. I can't hire a guy today and expect him to rise to the level of quality that I require. If he doesn't do that, it's my fault. It's not his fault, right? I always said that if a guy is not performing, we are not doing our jobs. And so training took on a huge amount of importance in my head. So anybody who joined me, I would not allow into the kitchen until he was ready to be there. And that was, and I think there was at one point, Talp, of course, I mean, also, again, it depends on what I was doing. For example, Talp, not much work, not much training, the burger, blah, 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 assembly. So fairly robotic, fast food sort of work. But Asia in a Box, even though it's the same level, same kind of audience, required much more training, because there's Thai food. First of all, you don't have experience with it, or Southeast Asian food. Anybody who came to work for me, so therefore, training how to make a curry, how to do a stir fry, timings, that was much more complex than say Talp. So they went through a much more rigorous training process. So of course, Talp and Asia Box chefs were the same. I mean, we operated one kitchen, so ideally when they would come in, at least 2 to 3 weeks of training before they even enter the kitchen. So it was very, very important to me. So am I answering your question? Essentially. It becomes, and I think I'm good at that. That was my value add to the company in my mind. I didn't actually do a lot of day-to-day operations for Talp. In the very beginning, of course, when you first start your restaurant, I was in the kitchen a lot. In daily day-to-day operations, but that's not my thing. I don't like doing that. I hate doing things over and over again. I don't like repetition, whereas restaurants is all about repetition, right? I mean, it is all about consistency, doing the same thing over and over again. Just like you said, you come to a restaurant regularly to eat one regular thing, and you will notice immediately it's slightly different, right?
Absolutely.
So it's all about that. But once I get that person up to speed and to the level that the manner to which I'm accustomed, then I let them go. And that's the whole idea, is that, you let people don't micromanage all the time. There's nothing worse than being micromanaged, especially in the heat of battle in a restaurant. If I'm in there saying, put little more basil, put this in, I mean...
mess up the brains of the guy.
Exactly. I mean, you're going to make things worse. So just let them be. If they're going to screw up, they screw up. And to my credit, didn't happen a lot. I mean, as long as the guy knew what my requirements are and he stuck to that. And that's the one thing I was fanatical about. Fanatical about the fact that they had to follow these
steps and processes
and rules. I mean, so there were no changes in recipes, for example. I will not change anything for anybody. those kind of things, if you just, it comes from me, then it kind of trickles down into the...
So that's sort of like the culture you set in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
So that's good, right? I create that culture.
Yeah.
And so I was good at that. So and then, of course, the larger Talp got, obviously I couldn't be training everybody personally, because at one point we had 130 employees. I mean, so I trained trainers. I mean, so my chef, who's even now, he still works for me off and on, a guy called Manu, came to us, and so I made him my trainer. So he's, so he would do that part. So I trust him to do that.
So there, you were, how do I put this? Most of your employees, especially the guys who wait on tables, or right, are tier 2 city, or not from a educated background.
Right.
And on one hand, that's the pool that you've got. On the other hand, you've got an evolving customer base who's traveled and sort of knows what they're eating and have a lot of questions. How are you managing a balance over there?
It's a hard one. So the whole service, the front end of the restaurant is a nightmare to me. Personally, because that's not, like, for example, the training, I don't get, I mean, I have some basic ideas, but I don't know enough either. I mean, so for me, the front end of the business is something I'm not good at. And I'm not a good person for that, because I tend to be somewhat short and brusque, and I'm not good. Like, my rule with my partner was like, I will talk to the customers. You just stay in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm very happy to do that, because if I come out, there'll be trouble, because I am like very dismissive and stuff like that. So I would be like, service people in the front, I'm not getting involved, but basic, be friendly, be nice, whatever, the usual bullshit. And so you're right. So you have a class of people, class is the wrong word, but a set of, a pool of service staff that may not always understand what you're doing, because it's something they've never encountered before. Correct. So it's very hard for me to expect someone to explain what are the intricacies of a Thai green curry to a service staff, so he can explain it well to a customer, right? So answer to your question was like not very well. So that whole evolving customer base who understands now what a good stir fry might be, and then a service staff who can't explain that. So there's a conflict there, and it comes across as a conflict, what is the word for it? As not a very good relationship between the customer and the server, right? Because the customer has got his whole, I went to Thailand and I ate this, and this is not how is it the same thing? And then the guy will say, yes sir, green curry, semi-gravy. And then that guy will go, what, you don't know enough. And then the server will go like, fuck you man, like don't tell me, he gets in, it becomes some kind of a weird class battle in a way. So all of that. So and I think that's still the case. That has still not improved. It's certainly better. Like if you go to fancy, like Smoke Company, for example, I was very much involved in the front end because that became important, because to explain how things work, because that food that I was making, nobody had really encountered it, or at least the science of how that whole thing works. So we had hired our staff 6 months before we opened. For 6 months, they went through training. So we hired all the way from a Oberoi guy who came in from the Oberoi school. He came in to train our entire staff with me, giving them regular little classes. I mean, taking classes and explaining. We had a commissary. We had a little area that we would just explain how everything works, how the science of curing, the science of smoking, all of that works. So by the time we opened, that went away. So that problem went away, particularly in Smoke Company. Because if the customer had any questions, every single person in that restaurant knew, all the way from the busboys to the captains and to the managers, knew exactly how to answer that question.
So that's probably also, was it like Gautam evolving in the restaurant space to say, hey, this is what I have faced, and so I would rather invest this 6 months ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Especially because I'm starting something very niche right now.
I credit my partner for that. Actually, because he was the one who insisted on that. Even though we spent a ridiculous amount of money on training, but he was much more insistent on that. And then I went along for the ride, and I'm glad I did. Because he was like, because it's a pet peeve for him when he goes to restaurants. This is the thing, he's like, bugger doesn't even know anything about the damn food that I'm ordering. How am I supposed to know what it is? Blah, blah. So credit to him for that. And so, yes, both of us were intimately involved in that. process of deciding when to start that whole training process, when, the whole idea of doing it much earlier. Like these days, if somebody opens a fancy restaurant, they'd hire maybe a month before, month and a half. I mean, we were all the
6 months,
like our executive chef.
So they were on your payroll 6 months ahead.
Absolutely.
Then, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So not all.
Yeah.
So I'd say like the lower level basic busboys and all, maybe a couple of months before we hired them. But our top management, executive chef, all the way down to CDPs and stuff, we hired all the way from 6 months to like maybe 4 or 5 months before we even thought about opening.
Was that a dream restaurant, or is there a dream restaurant?
It was something that it was 4 years in my head, just rolling around in my head, this whole idea. Because it required a certain amount of technology, not that it wasn't available here, but I mean, I eventually built that technology here. But something I didn't know enough about, so it took a long time of research and trying out things, as opposed to Talp, which was, an idea, and 2 months later it was done. This one took literally 4 to 5 years of me rolling it on my head, and of course, the worry of, okay, does anyone really want this, or is this something we should do? And then, of course, trying out recipes, constantly doing a lot of research, convincing my partner to do it. So it was much longer process of...
So did you have some alpha, beta testing before you decided, okay, this is what we're going to do?
Absolutely. So we had that, by this time I had my commissary, my central kitchen. So that was, literally I used to call it my mad laboratory. So where mad scientist laboratory, where like literally every single day trying out new things.
Why didn't I know you then?
I know, because we had lots of people came in. So a lot of people's memories of smoke company started 6 months before, because I would call people in once a week. I'd do trial meals. So I'd invite maybe 6 people from various, parts of my life or work-wise. So they would come in, try it out on them. So basically focus groups, essentially. Doing focus groups over a period of 6 months, constantly doing that. All the way down until I finally settled on a menu. So the menu was cast in stone by the time we opened, well, not cast in, what I meant to say is that tried and tested. Tried and tested and
evolved
completely into exactly what I wanted it to be.
So where was the influence? Was that travel that influenced you? Was that
the smoke company particularly? Oh, that was America. Because I lived in the southern part of America, so that's part of the food. I lived in New Orleans. So New Orleans is for me, I always tell people, if you want good food, there's only one place in America you're going to get it, and that's New Orleans. And I mean food, daily food. You go to people's houses, the food is great, as opposed to the Midwest. It'll be some horrible boiled meat and potatoes. But New Orleans is wonderful. Right? And then, of course, California is also got
Philadelphia, Boston. For me, what I had seen is Boston, the seafood, the crab cakes, oh my God,
fantastic,
look at that.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So in my head, I was always like, so I'd go to a lot of barbecue joints, not that I was focused on that, but if you're living in New Orleans, you go to a restaurant, generally there'll be some smoked something on the menu, some influence of that southern culture on the menus. So it was always in my head. But then actually there was a little, the catalyst to it all was, this would have been in maybe 2012 or so, when, maybe a little later, 2013 or so, I think. Talp, the Indranagar Talp, we had just opened that by then. And this friend of mine called Rohan Abraham, he runs this travel company in Nagaland, in a place called Dimapur. So he called me up and he said, hey, there's this chef I know who wants to come and cook in Bangalore. And I thought you'd be a good fit because she does. At the time, I was dating a girl from Nagaland, so I was like, hey, yeah. By which time she was getting smoked pork from home, and I'm like, oh, this stuff is good. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And this lady came down. But before she came, she sent me a list of all the stuff that I needed to get and what she wanted and what what was required and blah, blah, blah. So then she said the smoked pork, right? So she said, I need I think she had said 30 kgs of smoked pork. So I said, look, there's no source for it here. You would have to bring it. So then she said, okay. But then she said, okay, 30 kgs. She sent the courier cost. And it was going to be some 20, not 20. It was a huge amount, some $10,000 to get that bloody pork from there to here. So I'm like, no way, dude. That's ridiculous, So then I just asked her, I said, so just how do you make it? Maybe I can try to make it here. So she basically explained it to me. Then, of course, her thing is Nagaland, they do it above the it's a very kind of free-form thing. While they're cooking, they just put a little
I've seen
thing
that.
up
They
there
have some
and the strips of
hanging,
meat, and then they use that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know how to do that here, because that's so you need days to do it.
True.
Then, of course, that whole clique came. I was like, hey, New Orleans, Southern food, smokers. So then I said, okay, let's try to build a smoker. So I called this fabricator that I knew, and I found a design off the internet and said, make this for me. And he made it, and that was it. So that's where the genesis of Smoke Company came from, where I actually started smoking something. You know, so I made all the smoked pork, and she came down, and she was like, "Wow, even better than what I normally get." I'm like, "Yeah, because I'm me." So, and so that's why I'd say the idea started rolling around in my
total
head.
ideator, but I don't, but not someone who quite enjoys like the operational side of
I
things.
hate it.
Then, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is why even now I try not to repeat what I'm doing. Like even if I like this chili oil and say the beef rendang, what I make today. I mean, I know that people want it. They'd be very happy if I do it twice a week, 3 times a week. I just hate it.
You get bored,
Yeah, so I do it once a month, and of course there's a bit of sales in that because like people are waiting for that. But also because I just don't like repeating myself, especially with things that I already know how to make. And obviously, if it's something new I'm trying, I will do a lot of iterations of it before it makes it onto somebody's plate.
So you've got this fastest buzzer thing happening on Instagram, right? Just to explain, I normally look at my posts or I'm not so active, so I look at it once every 3 hours or something like that. And you would have posted it in like 7 minutes, dude. 7 freaking minutes.
I always tell people, people assume that I have an unending supply of this stuff. Like, you'll be like, oh, what's that? I'm like, yeah, but it's only 25 portions I'm making, right? I mean, it's not like I have some huge, like I have sold 2,000 portions or 200 or even 100 portions. That's not how it is. I haven't sold 100 portions. I've sold 25 portions in 7 minutes. It's not a big deal. But it's also what I'm comfortable with. I don't want to go beyond that point. And so it's a combination of, it certainly goes fast. But it's not because, it's also because of the fact that I'm making small batches of things, True. So and the problem is with that is that I end up pissing off people because they're like, oh man, just like you said, I only check all the way from people who say I don't have Instagram. So I'm like, dude, I don't know what to tell you, because if the minute I start doing taking orders and taking, then I'm going to piss off on more. So I'm not like so the whole idea of it being somewhat equitable, where everybody has the same shot at it, and you just have to get it.
It's a fair world, I think.
Yeah. So I just first come first served is my mantra.
Move in next to your place, because just the smell, and I don't even have to look at the Instagram.
I have two neighbors that I'm very friendly with. My right opposite, who they are my guinea pigs, and then of course this sweet Mangalorean family has moved in recently. So they are regularly getting the trials that I do.
So what's the weirdest food trip you've gone on?
I don't know if it's so weird in the sense that like the kind of food I'm eating, or
the food, just experiencing. I'll give you. So you said you went to China, right? So we did one trip to China, and this local guy told us, "Come, I'll take you to this place."
Right.
And there were two different sections, right? The first section, Gautam, is you walk through. It's almost like walking through a lab. Okay, so in different boxes, there are live snakes, there are live eels, there are...
so like a wet market, you went to basically.
Right. And so you say, this fellow, that fellow, and
choose, and then they cook it how
and
they
then
want
there
it.
are some pictures, because you don't get the language, so there's just some pictures. You don't even know what they do out of it. But you see the tables around, and people are like really loving it.
Right.
See, I'm actually drooling again.
Exactly.
And then you pick, and it's like I had the best aubergine with pork lard, for example. Sure. I'm drooling like shit over here. And then there was eel that is, fried and crisp and yet soft inside, and the spiced right and things like that.
Sure.
So what's the weirdest you've gone through?
Yeah, so I did a similar trip to China. So for me, China was an eye-opening experience in terms of what I've known as Chinese food. No, I thought I had enough experience. I've been to Hong Kong and Singapore and blah, blah, blah. But still, nothing prepared me for the amount, eye-popping things that I saw.
Yeah,
just
the
like you said.
culinary experience.
So nothing in particular, but I'd say because I've been to, that was just a one-off to Thailand. I mean to China, but Thailand to me would be a good example of me just getting more and more deeper into the strange world of Thai food, which is certainly not green curries and I mean that's what we all that's their front foot forward is green curry, that curry pad Thai, blah blah blah. But there's a huge world behind it, which so for me the best experience, just like you said, is going to markets, and I've seen things that I shouldn't have seen, maybe all the so that I'd say just going to markets around Asia is a weird experience, because you're either assaulted by sensory assault on yourself that is hard to even explain, whether you like it, don't like it. You occupy some. I always say there's some foods that occupy some weird space between liking and not liking. Right. That you eat it and you go like, whoa, but then like an hour later you're like, wow, that was interesting. It's a weird sense. So for me, that would be it. I did a trip to Ahmedabad. In India, I did this thing, this was before the pandemic. I was going to go to cities that I like the food from, right? I mean, so it's not cities, places that I so I love Gujarati food. I don't know, it's this vegetarian thing, right? People think I'm only eating, every day I sit at home and eat 3 kgs of beef. Not at all. I really love my vegetarian food. And for me, the 2 best vegetarian cuisines in the world are Gujarati food and my Kerala vegetarian food. I think is wonderfully fantastic. So Gujarati food I love it. So I'm like, I always wanted to go to Ahmedabad. So finally I got the opportunity to go. And I went there, and it was, again, an eye-opening thing. Is I thought dokla was something. It's not what I thought it was. It's really something else. And the shit that we see in the stores here, that's not a dokla. And then all the way to the Muslim cuisine of the old city of Ahmedabad. It was just fantastic.
So it's different, is it?
Yeah, I know it's different, but just I didn't expect it. You know what I mean? You walk into a place like Ahmedabad and you think of Gujarati food as being this. Even though I loved it, I had a very basic knowledge of what it was, and it was certainly an eye-opener of the way they use. And it's a weird thing, because in that part of the country, I believe, I know I might get shouted at, but they don't have a lot of ingredients. They don't have the complexity of, say, Kerala, where you have that incredible amount of ingredients and produce and seafood and the spice. I mean, like, you just so many, right? Yeah. Whereas in the north of India, the further north you go, that list starts becoming smaller and smaller. So you're working with carb on carb on carb. True. And how do you make something taste good that has, in fact, to me, that's quite an art of using a very limited set of ingredients and making something wonderful out of that.
And I think that is your niche as well.
Right, exactly. So, in fact, the whole smoking technique is that. I mean, there's 3 salt, pepper, meat. I mean, time and temperature. That's it. That's all you need. True. And so, to create something out of that, so Gujarati food to me is that. I mean, I know that people say it's very complex and all, but it isn't. It's the art of teasing something wonderful out of very simple ingredients. So I don't know if that's weird, but it was an eye-opening experience for me to actually experience that.
Rajasthan for me was like a...
There you go. That's another one. Wonderful. But then, what is their food? It's very basic and very simple.
They had some berries and they plucked some berries and
exactly.
It was one of the spiciest and really
Lal mas
delicious.
Or the jungly mas. Yeah. I mean, if people say these, the jungly mas, you've heard of that, right? I mean, it's ghee and chilies and salt and meat. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, the traditional recipe. But the way you do it, and you can tease these beautiful flavors out of it. So simplicity is a good thing. You know. As a, there was always joke when I see these menus which say 52 herbs in this kebab and all. I'm like, why you couldn't do it with 3, man? Like, why do you? And I just annoys me when I see menus like that. This Himalayan herb and this and that. I'm like, fuck off. Nobody, even the chef doesn't really taste that stuff in there. But I might be wrong. Who knows?
So are there some hidden skills with your knife you've got? Cutting?
This is a very good question, because I am the worst. I have the worst knife skills. So this comes from my not being formally trained. Right? So my knife skills are legendarily bad. So even if you ask any of my chefs, I'm like, cutting shit as meat, I'm good at. I know how to cut meat. But when it comes to vegetables and onions and garlic and all of that stuff, doing that whole I have scars regularly. I still cut myself. I still slice shit off myself. After 20 years of working in the business, I'm still not good at knife skills. So, yeah. And I always tell people, like, especially home chefs and all that, who are like, you don't need fancy knives and all. Just as long as you have some basic equipment and you know how to basically cut an onion. I have this one chef who's Chef Manu, who used to work for me. That guy is legendary. I mean, he'll go through. I love watching him because you're talking about knife skills. His is like
it's like an art, right?
1 kilo of onions in literally 3 minutes. He'll go like, it's got that whole, and he'll be talking to me while doing it.
Oh,
if I do it with 2 fingers, would have been gone by now. So yeah, I don't have that. I don't have great life skills.
So we've talked about setting up a restaurant, the journey of a restaurateur, what are do's and don'ts as advice to someone who's thinking of starting their own restaurant or even their own catering service of sorts. Gautam, in this journey as a creator and having gone through the various setups, failure must have been an integral part.
Absolutely.
Tell me your experience with failure and how have you looked at failure and your perspective about it and how you've sort of evolved through this journey.
So, 2 of the restaurants that I've started, which were both labors of love, were failures. I mean, like, huge failures, to be very honest. And so they were quite difficult to handle at the beginning. But I think it's a personality thing. I think some people handle it well, some people don't. I think it comes from that confidence thing also. It's like, okay, it didn't work, and especially if you realize the reasons why it didn't work. I know for a fact it wasn't the food, for example, right? I know for a fact that what I'm doing is not the reason it failed. Well, of course, it's not like I'm only a chef. I'm also a businessman. I'm also I need to worry about all the things. So very clearly, I understand that about myself, is that it didn't fail because of the food. It failed because I'm a terrible businessman. I'm a very good chef, but a terrible businessman. So therefore but I don't, in my head, I don't identify as a businessman.
True.
I identify as a chef. So it was quite easy for me to bounce back. But I wouldn't say that's the case for everybody. So some people never recover from it. Some people take a lot of time to recover from it. For me, I'm just fortunate to be one of those personalities that it doesn't take a long time for me to go like, hey, whatever, that happened. The only exception being Smoke Company. And that took, well, for me in my mind, it was a long time, but actually it wasn't. It was like, it was 2 months of, clinical depression, I'd say. To be very honest. It took 2 dark months. This was 2019, end of 2019. But I was in a very bad space. So that's the only time I ever felt such, where I never want to do any thing like this again. And I think there's still some of that in me, which is why I said I'm done with the restaurant business. But not always for this particular reason, because of the nature of the way things operate in Bangalore specifically. The pandemic, many reasons, but also some of this was like, oh man, this whole labor of love that I put so much 5-6 years into didn't work. And so therefore there's a lot of self-doubt, all of that. But nothing that's debilitating. I feel I can get up and brush myself off and get on with it. It's hard to give advice to people on things like this. I think it's just how you personally are. What kind of person are you? Are you able to handle it? Are you able to not take it so? Because my job is not my identity.
True.
I'm a chef, but that's not the only thing I am. I have a lot of other likes and dislikes and what have you, and so therefore, if my job didn't work, it's not the end of the world. You know? It's not like, for example, I think it's much more serious if your relationships don't work. That's a much bigger failure than your stupid work not working. To me, that's like, I was married once. That took some time to get over. The fact that it didn't work. So but to me, that's a much more serious failing in my mind than.
So what you're also saying is, in some ways, you're able to introspect and clearly demarcate, this was in my control and these are things that worked. This was not in my control.
Right.
And so...
Absolutely. Well, even some things that were in the fact that I should have run a good business was certainly completely in my control.
Yeah.
But I'm too lazy, I'm bad at it, I don't understand numbers, I'm not a math-driven person. I don't, even you ask me today what is, I'm like, I still don't know what the hell economics means, although I took a lot of classes of it. But that's just, so I don't let it worry me too much. And I suppose the only advice, if you had to, the advice I would give people would be, get up, the usual cliche, dust yourself off and get back to it, get back on the horse and try again. And of course, I know that's easy to say. So which is why it all comes down to how you are personally, how you deal with things personally.
Yeah. It's also about how you look at failure, right? Over here, the way you're talking about it, and I agree with that, is that you're not looking at it as, my life is a failure.
No,
this thing failed.
Not.
The stint that I was trying to do failed, and I'm internalizing, okay, next time if I'm doing something, here are things I would do differently, or I would not take some of these things.
But
so that's
the important part. See, like for example, some things I haven't learned, like an idiot, we still repeated the same mistakes that I knew 10 years ago. But that comes from a bit of hubris and all that, like I'm better than everyone and I know what I'm going to do. But more or less, yes, you just learn from your mistakes, as simple as that, and move on from it. You're right, it's not the end of the world. I mean, like I told you, those 2 months of depression that I had, the minute I started doing, which is what I'm doing right now.
What you like to do.
Yeah, so I started doing again, just getting back and cooking and doing what I like to do, and all that just kind of went away. One fine day I woke up and I was no longer depressed. And I'm sure, and I know mental health issues are not as simple as that. But certainly once I just got back onto that horse and started doing what I love and doing what I wanted to do, and all that self-doubt and all of that went away. Money, finances has a lot to do with it, right? Now suddenly, okay, I'm back on it, making enough money to keep my head above water. So those worries go away, because a lot of it can be financial, right? I mean, like, oh my God, it's failed. Now what am I going to do the rest of my life? Who's going to pay my rent? Now that you take that away, then you're free to be yourself again.
So, Gautam, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
It was such a delight talking to you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
First time I've ever done something like this, so let's see. I'd love to see the end product, because I'm going to cringe, I'm sure. So it should be fun.